Let's start out with the second thought video. Should we trust economists? The world's most famous fake science. Economy? Is the economy just made up, or is it a real thing that we can track and follow? The questions shall be answered on today's episode of Very Handsome American Man Explains Things to Us in very well edited videos. Don't look up if he's a communist. That would be problematic. Let's go.
No. Economists are constantly getting things wrong. But that's not what this video is about. Here in the US, we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with economists.
I dated a guy that wanted to be an economist, so no, I do not trust him. I will no longer trust this whole field of study because of my dating experiences. This is unironically me as well, so I understand you completely. Thanks for everything you know. Thank you, Gooset, for the subscription. Thank you very much, my friend. 9 fucking months. Oh, we also have a Twitch child. That is very nice.
We disagree with them on just about everything.
Isn't Giannis an economist? You're missing the point, my love. And I know that you're doing it intentionally to, not start shit, just to get my point in a twist. But somebody, you can distrust the science of. You can distrust the argument that economists can model their way out of systemic issues in capitalism without dismissing all economists as frauds just because they're economists, right? Like, lawyers are sleazy assholes. Are there lawyers that are pretty chill and smart and sometimes even very ideologically informed? Of course.
But tune into any major news channel anytime anything happens, and there they are, telling us, well...
What are investors supposed to take away from this?
I'm not sure, John.
It's a bit of a meme to dunk on economists for getting things wrong, especially predictions. Not long ago, in 2022, 70% of economists polled by Bloomberg saw a recession coming in 2023 that just never came. GDP growth was in fact stronger than pretty much ever before. Same thing.
It's what's the word? It's astrology for annoying people.
In 2021, 16 of the 36...
There are different schools of economics. Marxian and Global South-focused schools seem to make a point. Neoliberal is Austrian school. And the like, they're just a cult of worshipping rich people's money. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not dismissing. This video probably, I can guess, is about like American talking head economists. Dudes that make their whole career in basically doing active market sports betting as talking heads on Fox News.
Living Nobel Prize-winning economists predicted mild, quote, transitory inflation, right before a 20-year high of nearly 8% that we're still not really done with. And that's... actually it's fine. Because that's not their job. Telling us how the world works may be what they say their job is, how they're perceived, and what constantly asking them for their thoughts and predictions assumes, but really, the job of economists isn't to explain the world as it actually is. Really, their job is to represent the world the way they wish it was, and by doing that strategically, make that world a reality. Unfortunately,
this is a very good point about, unfortunately, most academic circles. This is not to dissuade people from pursuing a career in academic circles or pursuing academic excellence. This is simply a point about how the market economy can co-opt a lot of exceptionally well-intentioned academics, but also some really, really grifty ones as a means to reproduce ideology, to reproduce capitalist propaganda, right? Like you can have an academic in environmentalism dedicate their life to pursuing a, equitable economy where the planet is not being actively annihilated, but you can also have an environmentalist that makes 100 times more money than that one working for a think tank like pushing the world closer and closer towards environmental disaster. You can have an economist helping a struggling community to get out of a very, very fucked up particular mess that they find themselves in, or you can become a talking head for the capitalists that probably put that community in that very problem. Again, this is not criticism of academia itself. This is just saying that academia can be co-opted just like any other profession as a means for capitalism to continue reproducing itself. And most likely it will pay you the most. Lawyers, I mentioned earlier, like you can be a public defender helping thousands upon thousands and barely making ends meet, or you can go work for a private lawyer firm that represents exceptionally wealthy, rich clients or corporations and make millions every single month, right? Every profession, every tool of analysis, arguably even every way of life can be swallowed up by the dominant ideology and then spit back out as a supporter of said system. And that's pretty fucking scary. It's pretty fucking scary.
For us, economists aren't on our side. But first, it's ad read time because I've got to pay my bills. Let me show you something real quick. Google your name. I know you have to...
Like it doesn't even necessarily matter if we call it a science or don't call it a science. Everything can be co-opted.
To open another tab or switch apps, just do it real quick. Odds are some of your personal information comes up, right? If I search my name, it's just my public...
It's Aura, okay? Use Aura. Use Aura in his link. You will gain Aura. Okay? Very good.
Now, back to the show. You might remember in other videos we've talked about the economy and growth and how they're not real. They're relatively recent ideas built not on objective truths, but on specific political goals, bad logic, and subjective accounting decisions usually made by the rich and powerful for self-serving reasons, like more war for everyone and less work for them. We dunked on GDP not just because it's a bad metric, but because economic growth is fake, or more like arbitrary. Except that because most government...
Depending on how, I need to mention though, depending on how quote-unquote fixed a science is, with social sciences really not being that fixed, and being very often vibes-based, respectfully, as someone who has a diploma from one, versus so-called hard sciences, etc., etc. The main difference between the two is how much room there is to manipulate the data, to manipulate the facts, and to make pro-capitalist or pro-imperialist or anti-environmental arguments in one versus the other. Obviously, it's more difficult to turn somebody who studied environmental disasters into an advocate for continuing environmental disasters than it is to just pick up your average political science student and make him into a lobbyist, right? There's a lot more both ethical, moral leeway, but more importantly, there's a lot more space for data manipulation in the softer sciences because half of it is fucking vibes based. A man turns to an economist and says, "If I eat this bucket of shit, will you give me $100? The economist says, "Sure." So the man eats the shit. The economist pays him. Then the economist says, "If I eat the bucket of shit, will you give me $100? The man says, "Of course." So the economist eats the shit. They look at each other, confused, and finally the man says, "Wait, we both ate shit and neither of us is any richer." The economist replies, "Yes, but look at all the GDP we just created." Ha ha! That's a great one. That's a great one.
Care about keeping the rich happy, that fantasy has real consequences. Governments chase the fake idea with real policies that have an actual impact on your life. Usually, negative. In this video, though, I want to go a step further in our economics bashing. It's not just that economists are often wrong. Everybody gets things wrong. Predictions, models, theories, whatever. It's not that they rely on faulty premises or bad data or subjective metrics that they usually can't defend very well. Every Econ 101 textbook should come with a million caveats that basically make the whole thing worthless. The idea that we're all self-optimizing, rational actors with perfectly ordered, fixed preferences chasing utility in a vacuum where we only communicate through prices that we can negotiate is a total fantasy. But that's not the point. All that isn't what I take issue with. Most economists themselves will readily admit to all these problems. The reason we shouldn't trust them is much more foundational to the discipline. Economists pretend that they, and they alone, from a neutral outsider's perspective, understand capitalism.
And absolutely, and even more importantly, they never talk about alternatives to said system. Okay? And that is baked into how they're created. Like, you have dedicated your whole career of being an analyst of capitalism. What the fuck happens to your job if capitalism goes away? Like, you are the most directly involved proletarian as a, I don't know, capitalist, capitalism understander that does not have a capitalist company. You are the most directly linked to the continuation of the capitalist system as it is, as an economist. That shit is your bread and butter. Like, there's no reason for, the guys that tally the slaves and figure out how much this group of slaves or that group of slaves needs to work the field this day if slavery disappears, okay? There's nobody that can go back to Mr. Kentucky Fried Chicken back in the main house and be like, okay, we need to buy 7 slaves and we need to sell 3 slaves because I hear that the economy for the tall ones is really increasing. The price of the tall ones is really increasing, so we're selling the tall ones. We're getting 4 short ones. And my analysis suggests that the short ones work as efficiently as the tall ones, right? There's no job for that kind of slave manager if slavery disappears. Same like this. There's no job for capitalism understanders if capitalism disappears. Even though I disagree, like, there would be jobs for them, very suitable jobs. But yeah, if capitalism goes away, it's not just a job that's obsolete, but jobs at all. Yeah, absolutely. They'll escape to space with Jeff Bezos, surely. Or another banger, economic forecasting exists to make astrology look respectable. That's a classic.
The economy.
Something they act as this complicated technical thing bound by secret rules for them to uncover with data, charts, and experiments.
It also does I do a lot of anti-intellectualism bashing here, but sometimes the intellectuals do be annoying as shit. Economists exist as a sort of, let's call it, category that convinces everyday Joes that they will never be able to understand the market or capitalism or the system because they are not educated in that particular field. Like, leave the complex shit to us true understanders. You don't get how the world works, and therefore stop criticizing it because you're naive and you're stupid with your fucking socialisms and your anarchisms and your fucking social welfare systems, etc., etc. We know how it works. But it's interesting how every time they say we know how it works, it's always followed by cutting and cutting and cutting even the most basic of dignity that humans and working class people especially require.
The reality is much sadder. Economists are in the business of producing, sanitizing, and bringing into the world tools.
Esoteric priests, I love that. Talking head economists are the oracles telling you that life will get better, so don't get violent, literally.
Economists
are the true opiates of the masses.
are in the business of producing, sanitizing, and bringing into the world tools of violence against the poor. When the rich want ways to get richer at the expense of the poor, which is the only way they can ever do that, the literal job of economists is to make the graphs, formulas, and policies that say, we have no other choice. Economists don't study the economy, they invent it. But how do they do that? First, there are the obvious ways, coming up with theories that serve the rich.
They are a direct consequence of this liberal notion that you can have an experts-led government inside of the capitalist structure, which implies just leave it to the people who understand everything the best, and everything is going to start improving. And sure, compared to a bunch of fucking know-nothings, it's going to be relatively better, but the system eventually will subsume them, and they will simply create the most efficient exploitative tool instead of a broken exploitative tool. It all goes back to systems.
In 1890, John D. Rockefeller spent about $600,000, $170 million in today's dollars, to found the University of Chicago.
That's fucking crazy, dude.
Over the next 20 years, he would go on to put nearly $35 million more dollars into the school, or the equivalent of error, please use values of less than 10 million. Rockefeller once called this the best investment he ever made. That's because if you've ever heard of UChicago, it's probably for its econ department. Famously, it hosted people like Milton Friedman, the founding father of monetarism, and Theodore Schultz.
So just to rephrase this, rich people were like, yo, poor people be figuring out this shit. What should we do? Okay, where are the poor people getting their information from? Some dudes calling themselves economists. Let's make our own economists then. What do you mean, sir? We can't just what are we supposed to fucking breed them or something? No, just educate them. Make a whole university and give them money to study, but then brainwash them inside of the institutions. And you will have a literal army of talking heads appearing on every fucking talk show, morning at night, making the point.
Gary Becker, the guy.
It's borderline conspiratorial just how absurd it is. Literally.
Guys who came up with human capital theory. These guys are influential. You Chicago economists are always influential. They win more Nobel economics prizes than economists from any other school. They staff the Council of Economic Advisors to the president across both parties, and are at the front lines of creating economic theories you've heard about in the neoclassical tradition, what most of us get exposed to in high school or college as simply Econ 101. That's the first thing to focus on. At the very base level, economists create the frameworks through which we understand the world. Basic ideas like supply and demand is why this thing has that price. That's a pretty uncontroversial mainstream idea most of us are not just familiar with, but that we implicitly believe, even though, when you really think about it, you can probably name 1,000 counterexamples. Prices change over the course of a product's lifetime, or randomly by the day, or by the computer and IP address you're using to access it, or how well the guy who's selling it knows you, or if you get a discount for buying more than one, or if you're using a referral code. Means TV link in the description. Then there's the fact that nobody treats a phone from one company as the same as a phone from another company, or even one model or color as the same as another. The very idea of there being a supply of phones and a demand for phones is an abstraction. It doesn't really exist because every phone is its own product, and its price is just one of its qualities we take into consideration. It's not just tacked on at the end either. It's built and iterated throughout the process the same way the camera is. It's based on a bunch of other prices. And while sure, you might buy a phone for $1,000, you can't then turn around and sell it back to Apple at that same price. Why not? If price was a perfect mirror of value that emerges from the meeting point of supply and demand, what does it matter to Apple to have one rectangle worth $1,000 or several paper rectangles worth $1,000? Things fall apart even more when you go looking into how companies actually price things. Sometimes a train ticket will be set at a flat rate you pay to get on. Sometimes it's based on the distance you travel. Sometimes you buy the specific seat with specific perks like last-minute cancellation. Most of the time, things are priced with formulas that are themselves based on either data, vibes, or just good enough conventions like, here's what a normal markup is, just add 30% to what you paid for it and you'll be fine. Interestingly, it's often the case that formulas are based on economists' work more directly. Like, for example, when accountants at pharmaceutical companies have to help their managers decide whether to invest in developing one drug or another. They'll use what are called discounting functions. Basically, a formula that lets them put a present price on future drugs. Discounting functions are based heavily on the economic theories fleshed out by the economist Irving Fisher. His formulas were first mainly academic, then went into financial accounting textbooks, and then turned into common practice. People use these formulas not because the theory behind them shows us the truth of the
Common practice. How ideologically loaded is that, eh?
economy. Fisher's theories were just that. Theories about where value comes from. To which his answer was
The same way my theory of the economy is as valuable as theirs. My theory of money is as valuable as theirs. As long as enough people believe in mine, it becomes more of a common understanding than theirs has. Okay, it's a propaganda battle, but a propaganda battle that extremely rich people have a lot of funds that allow them to manipulate. TLDR.
was future profits. But discounting functions have helped to build a world in which, some of the time, Fisher's theory does apply. Future profits do determine price in some cases, not because Fisher was brilliant, but because he was useful for shareholders. The world was retrofitted onto his theories, built around accommodating the fact that discounting functions could and would be used because those who had power adopted and deployed them. Discounting functions, as investment technology that managers use, implicitly put the interest of shareholders first when making decisions about things like developing drugs.
But there's also theory of gravity. Back then, everything was a theory, idea plus evidence. Yes, but when it comes to organizing societies, a better point would be you could change gravity. Depending on how you define gravity, it pulls you harder or weaker. Right? Depending on how you define the economy, it starts adapting to the definition to an extent.
Fisher's idea of value is just a theory. It's a political opinion, really. But it's also a tool that an economist built that served the rich. So now, the drugs we produce in a capitalist society are indeed based on future profits. A similar thing can be said for supply and demand. The idea isn't a universal truth, we know that, but it does color how we think about the world. And it means that some companies can jack up prices and blame it on scarcity. We just don't think about that much. Economic theory glosses over this agency. It glosses over the 1,000 little decisions, moments, conventions, laws, individual people you need to have actually make something, make the place to sell it, make the money to buy it with, and have the transaction happen. Economists assume money, markets, prices, transactions all spontaneously appear out of thin air, and that all that history just evaporates the moment you and I decide to exchange something. And they've built theories and tools around this that come to have profound impacts on our lives. But that doesn't just happen. For economics to be performative, economists have to actually get involved in performing them. And that usually means doing experiments. You might have heard of this already, but UChicago is famously known for producing the Chicago Boys, a group of Chilean economists who were some of the first to do neoliberal economic theory in practice when they directly advised the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. To do that, the Chicago Boys created El Ladrillo, the brick, a 200-page economic program for Chile after Pinochet took over in a CIA-backed military coup. Among their recommendations, trade liberalization and tariff reductions, widespread privatization, including of Social Security, and a regressive value-added tax. Together, Pinochet's dictatorial rule and the Chicago Boys' shock therapy meant thousands of political opponents were tortured and disappeared, tens of thousands of protesters were arrested, and a devastating economic crash for Chile in 1982 that left 1 in 4 people unemployed. GDP eventually rebounded and boomed, but even when it did, the Pinochet regime ended with 45% of people in poverty, education and healthcare heavily privatized, and the richest 10%'s income going up 83%.
But even if an economic policy is showing that it doesn't work, the economist just simply steps into the room and says you didn't apply our theory well enough. There is every single method in the book that allows them to get away with fucking up the economic health of a particular place, and a million ways to both excuse it, or a million ways to make any success story also a product of their brilliant analysis. Gravity is a more compelling theory than US dollar. I could demonstrate gravity to an economist. An economist cannot demonstrate the economy to me. Yeah.
When Pinochet
Neoliberalism cannot fail, it can only be failed.
stepped down, Chile was the 8th most unequal country in the world. Milton Friedman called this a miracle. And Chile is far from the only place where these little experiments
Like when you can redefine what it means to be a wealthy country, then you have complete power over said country. If people are starving on the street and yet you say, look at the GDP growth, and enough world leaders, enough academics, enough intellectuals, enough people with quantifiable power sit there and say, yeah, GDP is what we should be looking at, not home ownership rates, for example, then that's what becomes the new standard. That is why it's so easily manipulated.
take place.
Because we do not have a common ground on which to all agree what is good or what is bad in a society when it comes to the liberal analysis or the conservative analysis, or even your classic fucking economist entering the room and LARPing intellect. And the second something like that exists, it can be manipulated very easily.
Economists like Jeffrey Sachs have given other countries like Bolivia, Poland, and Russia the shock treatment too. That didn't work out either. More recently, economists' experiments have taken on a more conservative scale and approach, but it's been no less devastating. A lot of the time, these experiments are directly sponsored by philanthro-capitalists who want to test run their libertarian fantasies, and only their libertarian fantasies. No billionaire is sponsoring research on socialist economics in practice, mind you. Economists, by and large, are of the same pro-capitalist breed. Left-wing, anti-capitalist work in political economy does exist, quite a lot of it actually, and it's remarkably thorough, but it's just not getting this kind of support and attention, whether that's in the media or when it comes time to do the government work. In any case,
Because nobody's paying you, no rich guy will pay you to talk shit against a society that organizes around making rich people very happy. That's why you should subscribe and avoid the ad that is going to play in exactly 2 minutes. Ain't no millionaire paying for no shit when it comes to this channel. But you, everyday Joe, yes, you who needs to buy diapers for their children, put some of it away and donate through a subscription or by oiling me up to your favorite or second favorite Twitch streamers, and through that be their oiler, be their millionaire, be their Rockefeller investor. Thank you for even considering it.
in other instances, these pro-capitalist neoclassical economists work more directly with governments. In Egypt and
Are you in America? No, God forbid.
in Peru, another economist, Hernando de Soto, got to flex his theories about the economy. His secret mystery behind why capitalism worked in the West but not elsewhere was, according to him, as simple as having formal property titling, basically a legal record of who owns what land and housing. De Soto argued that if the poor were poor in the global South, it was because they had all this wealth sitting idle in homes and land that they couldn't use to take out loans. Therefore, they couldn't become entrepreneurs by starting businesses, and that's why they're poor. De Soto didn't blame the poor for being lazy or having backward
Remember the argument that the Israelis gave the Palestinians Gaza, and instead of the Palestinians concentrating on being entrepreneurs and creating technology startups or hotels, they just further impoverished their open fucking air prison camp, right? You could always make the economic argument that the quasi-economic argument that, you know, the reason that people are poor or the reason that neoliberalism doesn't work in this particular part of the world is because their culture is quote-unquote inferior, and they indeed did deserve or do deserve the enlightenment which comes with an imperialist boot. You either believe that neoliberalism doesn't work in most places, or you to an extent have to be an inherent bigot. Because how do you explain it not working in 95% of the planet, even when using the very neoliberal economists' definitions of what a good economy is? It's not working for most places. So how can you explain that without inherently, consciously or subconsciously believing that certain parts of the world are uncivilized and therefore cannot develop under the neoliberal boot as well as some other countries can?
Towards cultures like other economists, he had a simple market solution. And because he was influential, with the backing of several prominent neoliberal thinkers and organizations, in 2004, the World Bank took a chance on his ideas and ran the Urban Property Rights Project in Peru. Did it work? No. Quote, property titling had produced no increase in credit to the poor. How about in Egypt? There too, De Soto ran his experiment. What was that result? Quote, the evidence available shows that there is little or no positive impact. The impacts we did see were property owners getting more rights and tenants getting screwed over a lot more. Rents were jacked up under the new titling system that made selling plots easier for owners, especially big owners, which makes sense. If the only asset you own is the house you live in, property title or not, you're not gonna sell it unless it's the very last thing you do. With all this land being made into liquid assets, though, the wealthy could speculate with it, buying up more of it pretty easily during economic downturns that forced the poor to sell them off, and concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And if the wealthy didn't get there first, tons of small owners, and I do mean exclusively small owners, lost their land when they couldn't pay what loans they did take out, and the bank took their collateral. From the economist point of view, though, this all just looks like growth, because suddenly
that's exactly what I wanted to say.
So much more wealth was visible. The whole thing was a total flop. People just weren't taking out loans now that...
But JT, what is flop? What does flop mean? What does flop mean? It's not a flop if you say that GDP growth is success, okay? Did they hijack the conversation from the get-go? That's why there's no winning. Thank you very much, Anonymous Gift Subber. Thank you very much, Xi Jinping, for making today's very struggling daily sub goal move a little bit in a positive direction. I really appreciate it.
They had property titles. And that makes sense because De Soto...
Thank you for being my Rockefeller. Thank you for rocking my world till I fell for you.
His theory was based on bullshit. In countries like the US, where he was supposedly taking inspiration from, most small businesses don't need to borrow at all. When they do, the most common source of loans is credit cards. Using your house as collateral isn't even an option for most people. Obviously, property title.
Dude, nobody even owns anything. Like, if you told a proud free market capitalist 100 years ago that most houses would be mortgage-based, where the bank basically owns it for 30 years, with 2 cars parked out front that are either leases or also taken out through a loan, they would be like, that sounds like communist China, but the bank is the Communist Party. They own everything, god damn it, right? Like, the most basic of promises of the treats that we're gonna get in this beautiful system of ours, we end up not getting either. Like, this, it's a lose-lose. Thank you, Shifty Pizza, so much. Looks like my last sub didn't go through. Thank you very much, Shifty Pizza.
Wasn't
and no worries.
What made capitalism work in the West? Imperialism was. But that doesn't make for good economic experiments from the World Bank's perspective. But we've gotten off track. The worst part of this isn't that De Soto got it wrong or based his theory on nothing but vibes. Economists do that all the time. That's not what this video is about, remember? It's that his theory actively reshaped politics in several countries because the rich and powerful could benefit. Before De Soto, poor people had power when they could keep the rich at bay by holding land and housing in common or with informal titles that made it hard to buy up. They had power when their wealth wasn't too liquid and tied up in small assets like livestock. But this one
economists exist in capitalism capitalists pay for their scholarships. Universities teaching economy classes readjust their analysis to suit the perspective of the wealthy donors that invest in them. Those economists go out there and start working and quote unquote analyzing. The only thing they know about is free markets, and free markets. They literally jerk off to them every fucking morning. So when inside of a free market structure, shit isn't working well, their only contribution to the conversation is going to be what? Make the markets even more quote-unquote free, which then contributes to us entering later and more fucked up stages of capitalism, which then radicalizes those same economists who, due to their material conditions, can only see insofar as capitalism and nothing else, which then stimulates them to say what? We need even freer markets and even more devastation of the poor and the working peoples for the name of our experiment continuing for another day. It's a snake eating its own ass. It's an unavoidable pattern. That's why everything from culture to the definition of what is normal and to our analysis of economy good or economy bad is informed by the economic system in which we find ourselves in, which is capitalism. Thank you, McGinn, very much for the bits.
Economist theory and his little experiments and the mountains of support from the world's richest and most powerful people actively destroyed that power. Titling programs meant foreclosures and evictions targeting the poor. It meant more people having to find work outside the home for large capitalists who now owned more. It meant courts, bailiffs, prisons, and armed police being hired to enforce these new property laws. Violence for the many and prosperity for a select few. Everywhere the story is the same. Capitalist growth just means inequality. Economists are not your friends, and they do not deserve your trust. They are foot soldiers doing the dirty work of justifying misery.
And again, absolutely correct. And they're not, the majority of them, they're not like this just because they're evil or just because they're grifters or just because, they're on a payroll by some big think tank or whatever. They are products of a system just the way you are products of a system, okay? It's just ironic that if there's any school of thought or social science, if we want to call it that should bring you the closest to class consciousness and a critical understanding of capitalism, it should be that of economists, right? It should be the easiest for an economist to become class conscious. And yet it is the hardest because those very professions are where the most money is funneled by capitalists as a means to ensure that alternative models, alternative analyses of what is normal, what system we should use, and so on, never enter the limelight. Snake eating its own motherfucking ass.